The Edmund Rice Centre for Justice and Community Education is part of the Edmund Rice Community Services and is located on country of the Wangal-Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation, on what is now known as Balmain. We acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the land we meet and note that sovereignty was never ceded. If coming to this from other parts of Australia, take time to acknowledge the land and communities of other First Nations whose country you may be part of.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special occasion on NAIDOC Week. I hope everyone can hear us. Claude, could you give me a thumbs up to just let us know that you can hear us okay? Excellent. So National NAIDOC Week, can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on, elders past and present, and particularly tonight we have one of our great elders, if he will allow me to call him that. Younger elders, who will be talking tonight on a very important topic. But I thought I'd just firstly introduce NAIDOC Week. National NAIDOC Week is a celebration held across Australia in the first week of July each year, from Sunday to Sunday, to celebrate and recognise the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. NAIDOC Week is an opportunity for all Australians to learn about First Nations culture and histories and participate in celebrations of the oldest continuing cultures on Earth. You can support and get to know your local Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander communities through activities and events held across the country. So where there are opportunities to participate, and we had a nice note from Leah who mentioned the event that she was at today, to be part of NAIDOC Week. Today's event is one that I've been very much looking forward to, and we actually had looked to hold it in Reconciliation Week, but unfortunately Pastor Ray had a death in the family, and we acknowledge that, Pastor Ray. So we had to postpone it, but he kindly offered to do it in NAIDOC Week, which is fantastic. We warmly welcome tonight Pastor Ray Minniecon, one of our distinguished Edmund Rice Centre Advisory Committee members, as well as being an Aboriginal pastor with roots in the Kabi-Kabi and Gurang-Gurang tribes of Queensland. Ray is also a descendant of the South Sea Islander people with connections to the people of Ambrym Island. Ray lives in Sydney and has dedicated his life to starting churches, supporting members of the Stolen Generations, as well as many other roles and achievements, including school boards and community boards. As a founder of the NAIITS Australia, pastor and founder of SCARD Ministries in Glebe. Pastor Ray tonight will address the following topic: where to now? What are the new barriers to true reconciliation? So without further ado, I'll hand over to Pastor Ray. Thanks, Pastor.
Thanks, Lopi. And thank you, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Is it clear there, Claude? Okay, mate. If it doesn't come through, Claude, just bang on the screen a bit harder. Look, it is an honour and a privilege to be here tonight to talk about post-referendum issues and challenges after the referendum. We're just reflecting just a moment ago about a number of these kind of challenges, because I came from a different era. I came from an era where I was under the Aboriginal Protection Act up until 1967, or really it went through to the 1970s. And so that particular era, or the people who came through that era were a lot more clear in terms of the issues that we knew we had to face. And they came out with, guns blazing, especially here in Sydney, in the streets of Redfern. The big cry at that particular time was, what do we want? Land rights. When do we want it? Now, what do we got? And so that particular vision has always been a major part of my DNA, and I've grown up with that. And those calls for justice. And then through that era too, then the political processes took place or took over a lot of our energetic advocacy at that time, and started to implement things from the federal government's level, because what the 1967 referendum did was take control of, it allowed the federal government to take control of Aboriginal affairs from the state governments. And for me, you know, you look back in that era and you think, we're still under the Aboriginal Protection Act. It just shifted. It shifted from one particular government or several particular governments to the federal government. And we still now have an Aboriginal minister who looks after our affairs, who tries to look after our affairs. And so you do ask the question, you know, what has changed? For me, I think after the referendum, I could talk a lot about before, but after the referendum is tonight's topic. For me, it's back to the beginning again, because it began with land rights. And I think that's where we're heading back to, that particular struggle and that particular vision of land rights. And through that era that we've gone through, there's been a couple of really significant things that we have achieved. I mean, under the, not the Hawke government, who was the guy before that? Whitlam. Under the Whitlam government, we had the 3 H's, you know, health, housing, and education as the policy drivers for our future. I mean, there's still 3, those 3 are still fundamental to our future. And we're seeing that those issues are still with us today, whether it be health, whether it be housing, or whether it be education. The one that was missing there, the missing link in all of that kind of stuff, really was the whole notion of economic development, to give us the rights and the freedom to make our own destiny through self-determination, through business enterprises and those kind of things. So this is where we are now. We're in this new era. After the referendum, it's a scary, it had been a bit scary for me at times, because we saw all these young Aboriginal leadership come through with a lot of knowledge, a lot of education. And after the referendum, they kind of disappeared. And, you know, we're asking the question, what next? Where do we head to? Let me give you 4 declarations, I think, that came out of the era from the 1970s to now. One of those declarations came out of the Mabo decision. And the Mabo decision really did sink into the country here, into the consciousness of the country, the very fundamentals of what we're on about. One is land rights, and the other one is identity. And there's 2 High Court decisions that came out of that particular era up until this particular time. The Mabo decision made this particular declaration, and I've embellished it a little bit for us tonight. In that particular declaration, it declared that all Indigenous peoples are entitled, as against the whole world, to 4 things: possession, occupation, use, and enjoyment of the lands of their ancestors. Now, that's my interpretation. Even though it applied to the people of Murray Island or Mer, I've taken that definition and just transposed it and included all of our people, because it did mean all of our people at that time. So the declaration would read that all Indigenous peoples are entitled against the whole world to those 4 things: possession, occupation, use, and enjoyment of the lands of their ancestors. That includes me, includes all the younger people. And it's been the fundamental challenge for us to not only get the declaration from the High Court enshrined in some kind of constitutional manner, like we tried with the voice. But we did get the legislation that we call now native title out of it. And for many of us, it's a useless title because I now have to prove that I have connection to this country, where Mabo already proved that he had connection to the country, but now we have to go around the same kind of legal processes to prove that. There was another High Court decision made in, I think it was in 2020, and it had to deal with our identity. As we know, there was a section in the former government's legislations where they would take Maori so-called criminals and send them back to New Zealand. And within that section, I think it's section 150 or 550, whatever it was, they had the power then to take any Maori person who had committed some kind of criminal offence. I'd never ever went across to the Kiwis. I'm not quite sure. Did I go across to the Kiwis? No, it's only the Maoris. How wonderfully racist is that? And send them back to New Zealand. Well, there were two young Aboriginal people who were in that cohort of people who were being sent back to New Zealand, but they had Maori heritage, but they also had Aboriginal heritage. And so they took their case to the High Court and said, no, because of our Aboriginality, you can't send us overseas because we have connections to this country through the Native Title Act and through the Mabo decision. And they won their case. And in that particular case, this is 2020 now, not very recent, about 4 or 5 years ago, this is what the High Court declared. Once again, I'm using it as a means of communicating the power of what happened in that particular declaration. In terms of identity, they declared that all Indigenous peoples are not outsiders or foreigners in their own lands. They are the descendants of the first peoples of their country, the original inhabitants, and they are to be recognised as such. They also declared that none of the events of invasion, settlement, federation, or the advent of foreign citizenship laws have displaced the unique position of Indigenous peoples with their lands. And the last thing they declared was that Indigenous peoples have a unique connection to their country. It is not just ancestry or place of birth or even both. Indigenous peoples have a connection with the land, waters and skies under Indigenous laws and customs. And no imposed Citizenship Act has removed or modified that connection. No parliament or foreign government has removed or modified that connection by any other laws or legislation. It's a very powerful and very important High Court decision because it solidified not just our access to the land or our land rights in the Mabo decision, as described in the Mabo decision, but it now anchored us in our identity and our connection to country. And it went beyond, I think, the native title laws and really solidified my identity as an Aboriginal person in this country. So I don't come under any of those citizenship laws or any other of those kind of laws. And so that's the heart of where we're at. That's what we've gone back to. And really, we haven't left that. And so when we come to the referendum now, I know many of our people have expressed deep disappointment at the referendum's outcome, including myself. For instance, the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council issued a statement highlighting the bitter irony of a society that has been on this continent for a mere 235 years, refusing recognition to its original owners who have lived here for over 60,000 years. That's more than irony, isn't it? And they called for a period of silence to mourn and reflect on the implication of the referendum result. while also signalling a continued commitment to justice, rights for Indigenous peoples, including land rights, including those two fundamentals of Mabo decision and also the Love and Tromp versus the Commonwealth. They were the two young fellas, Love and Tromp. They won their case and they now still stay here in Australia, which, you know, we're very thankful for the High Court for making that kind of judgment. I think so. The first thing really is the disappointment and that reflection. The second is that we now have to focus on truth-telling and self-determination. And Snake, our secretariat of our national secretariat for our children, and the national voice for our children, emphasised that while the result was not what they had hoped for, it does not define our mission or their mission. They understood the importance of truth-telling about Australia's history and the need for self-determined solutions to issues affecting Indigenous communities. And so they advocate for community-led services and the establishment of a national commission for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children with the power to investigate right violations. And boy, do we need some kind of a focus on a human rights charter that protects children. Something similar to what the Switzerland Constitution has. And the third thing is that there is still this call to action and reconciliation. Reconciliation, Australia highlighted the urgent need for continued reconciliation efforts, noting that the referendum debate had exposed deep-seated racism and misinformation, and they call for renewed commitment to defending Indigenous rights and building a better nation that fully includes and respects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And fourthly, Amnesty International asked for systemic changes. Amnesty International viewed the voice as a significant opportunity to progress human rights for First Nations people through a consultative policy-making process. They emphasised that Indigenous-led approaches are crucial for achieving better outcomes in various sectors, including education, healthcare, justice, and I could include their economic development. And despite the referendum's failure, they said we still remain committed to advocating for systemic changes that empower Indigenous communities. And so this is what our activists are telling us and saying in this whole process. I know we don't have a lot of time online, but if I was to summarise some of my expectations post-referendum, the first would be I'd like to see more accountability and to ensure that policies and resources are allocated to address the systemic issues affecting Indigenous communities, like Snake has already said. And there should be accountability. There is something like, I think $38 billion spent on us. And there's only 900,000 of us. So I know I'm worth about $42,000 or $44,000 to somebody. But who's being accountable to that? How can I be accountable to that kind of money being spent on us when I don't see those outcomes in terms of health, housing, education, and also some economic empowerment? And so my summary is, one, we need accountability and implementation. We need, two, continued advocacy and activism. I won't shut my voice up. I still got a voice. I'm still going to use it here and there. And we need to engage the grassroots in organising political lobbying and public education to challenge these systemic racisms and colonial structures. I think thirdly, we need community unity and support. Things like tonight here, where we have this community unity and support for our people. We need non-Indigenous allies who actively support and participate in the journey towards a reconciliation and justice. We also need, especially from the church sides of things or the religious sides of things, we need spiritual and cultural resilience. We need to draw the strength from our faith and our cultural heritage to remain resilient and hopeful. And that, I say that again, to remain resilient and hopeful. And so we need to gather as a community to support each other, to seek guidance and remain united in our purpose. We still need a clear commitments to land rights. We need more to strengthen our legal protections. We need to look at restoration and reparations continually, especially for our stolen generations. We need a sustainable land management system, especially in the light of the climate crisis that's in our country. And it's interesting for me to see in the last, since COVID anyways, the incredible rise in organisations now who are taking up the cause of the climate crisis. And sadly, the Aboriginal voice is not there, or the land, the people who own the land, who know how to look after the land, their voices are not clearly heard in that particular place. We need inclusive decision making. That's what the voice was supposed to bring, a much more inclusive way of ensuring that our voices are heard. And we need to empower our communities and build their capacity. I'm going to stop there. And so I'll just finish with this one little phrase from the New South Wales ALC. They said, "To our people, we say, do not shed tears. This rejection was never for others to issue. The truth is that rejection was always ours to determine. The truth is that we offered this recognition." That's right, we offered this recognition, and it has been refused. We now know where we stand in this country, but we can always say, always was, always is, always will be Aboriginal land. And we'll stop there. So I know it's a very brief one, but I was trying to be succinct as possible, knowing that you very educated people and supporters really want to engage with these particular challenges and issues for us.
And thank you, Pastor Ray. And can I just let everyone know that if you'd like to ask a question or put some comments, I've opened up the chat, so you can actually add to the chat, and I will try and get to as many as we can tonight. But perhaps I can start off with a bit of a conversation as well, Ray.
Oh, you sent me that wonderful, powerful 4 questions.
I put some draft questions together just to start the conversation. But if you have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we can continue the conversation. Firstly, in terms of where to from now, do you have thoughts on how organisations such as the Edmund Rice Centre, but also others who see themselves as strong allies, or even individuals who feel a strong sense of allyship, can lean in as allies to support the process from here?
I think the term ally has often been thrown around without the necessary commitment. That's just not only from you guys here from the Edmund Rice Centre, but I work with so many other institutions, particularly within the religious sector, and I hear a lot of words, a lot of promises, but how do you go from the rhetoric to the reality to the commitment? And what kind of commitment there is there? It's not enough to claim allyship, to be allies, but you must confront and dismantle the systemic racisms that persist in all of these institutions. Like I said, I work with the church. I know what that kind of racism is like. And so, you know, organisations like this need to go beyond performative gestures and engage in meaningful actions, such as advocating for policy change, amplifying Indigenous voices, and holding the government accountable for its continued negligence and exploitation of Aboriginal communities. That to me would be truly allyship, which demands sacrifice and willingness to disrupt the status quo. We need that kind of allyship now. We just need to keep the government on its toes. I don't want to say honest. I think we've even overused that word, to keep the government honest. They're not honest. I don't think they ever will be. But just to keep them on their toes and point them and tell them that their policies aren't working. And we might be seeing some changes in the government maybe at the next election. And so how are we going to be advocates with a particular party that was responsible for the no vote? And what are their answers? What are their solutions? What are their policies that they have for us? And I haven't heard anything yet from them or from any of the parties. And so, and I haven't heard anything from the churches. I haven't heard anything from anyone to give me some hope that, okay, we're with you, my brother. We're fighting with you. We're down there in the ditches. And we're looking through no man's land, and we'll see how we can offer some kind of support. And so for me, you know, especially within an institution like this that proclaims the love of Christ, that true Christian allyship should go beyond words. It should embody the teachings of Jesus, who always stood with the oppressed and challenged the powerful. So that would be my response to the term allyship. What's another word for allyship?
Friend.
Friendship. Boy, do we need some of that. And I think in that allyship too, I would like to see us pick up the heart and hurts and wounds of our young children, our young people. We're seeing far too many of them in going into the jails, and they come out from that system and they're more damaged than ever. And so this is setting us into a trajectory, if we don't do something about it in terms of policy changes and stuff, we're going to be picking up these issues from their children and their children's children for the next, I don't know how many generations to come, because of the ways in which our policy works or doesn't work.
Now, I haven't seen any other questions yet, but I might then move to my second question, if that's okay, Ray? And I was interested actually in that issue of the younger generation and your thoughts on this next generation of leaders coming through and what may be needed to support them to take on the mantle of the rights agenda, the empowerment agenda, self-determination and reconciliation agenda, all the things you spoke of during your talk, but where obviously we've had this event now that has drawn a line in the sand. And it was interesting because it's coincided interestingly with what I feel is a transition period of leadership within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, of that generation who you talked about that came through, particularly in the 70s and 80s, who had a very clear sense of what it was they were fighting for. And where now a lot has happened in that period, but now we have that next generation. So my question is, what possibly can we do to support that next generation? And is there a role?
Well, there certainly is. I think one of the major challenges now, and I'm working on this right now as we speak. The last time I had an understanding or some teaching around the UN Declaration of Human Rights was back in 1995. And that was when Mick Dodson was the Social Justice Commissioner. And so he helped us to understand the Declaration of the Rights of the United Nations Human Rights Charter, which Australia signed to way back in the 1940s or something. And also he then introduced us to that other concept of the draft declaration at that time of the rights of Indigenous peoples, and how our people have always gone to the UN to try to at least cry out for justice from other nation groups who would put pressure on our country here to deliver some of the outcomes that we were hoping for. And so I think human rights now becomes a major part of our discussions and our debates with our next generations. I mean, they're talking about the colonialisms and its deconstructions and all of those kind of things. The biggest colonial structure that will not change, or seems to be the rock in the middle of this storm, is the church. It is the heart of the racist structures in this country. Try to change that one. And you might get a change in the ways in which society then reflects upon what is human rights. Because right in the heart of that human rights struggle is Jesus. And that's what he stood for. And so human rights is really at the heart of where we need to take our next generation and retrain them and deliver them back into, or retrain them and help them to see what it says 30 articles in the United Charter of Human Rights, to see what human rights are, and to revisit those charters and then try to work out how they can then advocate based upon those particular articles for our future. I mean, take the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 3, that we have the right to self-determination. Article 19, free, prior and informed consent. All of these are just fundamental. In the Declaration, there's about 41 different articles in there that we could bring into the discussions and the debates and the ways in which we advocate for our future through just those two particular documents: the Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There's a fourth one there too. There's so many in there. I mean, Article 4, I think, talks about economic development. We have the right to economic development. And so all of those rights are there. And I think our people need to be sensitized to them, but also to imbibe them so that that can be a part of their journey into a more just Australia.
I had a question on that, but there's actually a couple of questions that have come through. Thank you, Nia, and also Joy and John Connor. Nia asks, what sort of policy changes do you want to see? And Joy and John ask, looking at legislative change for young people, which areas are most urgent for an organisation to focus on? Youth incarceration, education, age of criminal responsibility?
I don't think any of those you could put in to say this is the number one. I think they're all out there as number ones. They're all part of this puzzle that we have to solve in order to get to our next generation. So we do need education. It's just fundamental. And it's good to see our education systems just, possibly changing a lot. But then if we don't have healthy people, how can we then produce the kinds of results that we want, or the young leaders that we want? And so we need them to have a much more of a critical mindset so that they can judge the kinds of policies and changes that are happening now. I mean, where do you want to see these policy changes? Is it in climate crisis? Yes. Is it in education? Yes. Is it in ways and means of trying to reduce the high rates of incarceration? Yes. Is it the ways in which they're dealing with our youth out there in Alice Springs? Is that the policy that we want? To shut down the whole thing, the night economy, so that nobody benefits. We feel a bit of that here in Sydney too, with the night economy is gone now since the government shut down our old King's Cross. I'm joking, you guys.
Another question's just come through. How is it, this is from Rob Tulip, how is it possible to change Christian theology to focus on liberating message of Jesus? How does the story of the cross speak to Indigenous trauma?
Rob, you better write the article on that one, mate, because I think there's been a lot in the theological area that's been written about these things. It's whether it's getting through to the leadership to actually put in their own ways of changing their attitudes and their mindsets in order to change their systems and their structures. Because right there is where the problem lies, is in the systems and structures. I was working with one denomination when I came to this incredible, powerful realization that has made me think, wow, this is, you'll need another crucifixion of Jesus to try to change it. Most denominations have two Bibles. The first is their constitution, and the second is the Bible. And in many of their decision-making processes, it's the constitution that overrides the biblical challenge, thoughts and truths. Yeah. And so you've got a system here that is worse than the government in the ways in which it handles its own attitudes and behaviors towards others. And so how do you change that? It's difficult. I've been working on this for the last 40 odd years and I haven't had any much, there's only small little pockets of it, but it's the sustainability of that, those little pockets of things there. The Uniting Church have got their covenant processes. They're now going through a review of that. And you have to ask, after the last, 20 or 30 years of that particular document in place, what have they achieved? And other churches have gone out and apologized when Rudd apologized, but what have they achieved? So it's got to go beyond the rhetoric and get into some kind of praxis. That would be my greatest hope and joy, is to see the church, which is the most powerful organization in the country, change its attitudes and its behaviors. Sadly, it still lives in Matthew 23.
Maybe I can segue to something in terms of this week's theme of NAIDOC Week. And the theme is keeping the fire burning, black, loud and proud. And what has been achieved over the past century? Are there any words, given what's been achieved over the past century, are there any words of advice you might like to pass on to the next generation, given how much has been achieved despite the outcome of last year's referendum, to perhaps, take stock of all the things that have happened, particularly over the last 40 years of reform, of moving the dial forward, if you like. And what would your advice be to that?
Keep the fire burning in your hearts. We need you desperately. And I mean, we do still have the 41% who voted yes. And we're very, very thankful for that particular cohort of Australians who want to see change. And let's try to get that 41% up to 51 or even 60% to make the changes necessary in all the institutions that are in our country and to change them in ways in which we can have a much more better opportunity at a better future for our next generations. So keep the fire burning. You're here tonight because you've got a fire in your heart and a fire in your spirit. And I'm trying to say to you, if I had some coal here, I'd be throwing it into you so I can fire you up. Or some wood or some other kind of stuff. Yeah. Then the only thing we have got to throw into that fire is our words. And so keep talking amongst yourselves and just keep your hearts in that right place so that your fire, it will never be snuffed out. And I can guarantee you it won't be snuffed out in our Aboriginal community. And we really appreciate you, each of you who have joined into this struggle with us. So keep your hearts burning with love for justice, love for freedom.
Got a comment from Madeline Kingston. She's in Wurundjeri country, Melbourne, Victoria. And she also acknowledges the elders past, present and emerging. Most provisions known as conventional human rights are unenforceable unless expressly included in the domestic laws of the UN member states. This perhaps actually lends into this last question I had for you, Ray. The Uluru Statement alignment to the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Ambrym, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is quite clear. Is there, and can I add this to Madeline's question, is there a need to revisit the international human rights agenda as you've talked about and develop understanding of its importance to recognition of First Nations rights in Australia and the importance of human rights generally, not just with our First Nations next generation of leaders, but perhaps more broadly across the community in Australia to see that in fact what was being asked of was nothing different from what we have signed up to as a country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the international human rights agenda needs a serious reckoning because it's hypocritical for Australia to sign an international declaration while simultaneously violating the first rights of the rights of our First Nations people. And as you said, the Uluru Statement calls for a voice, a treaty and truth, which aligns perfectly with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. However, without enforcement and genuine commitment, these alignments are meaningless. So we must hold international bodies accountable and push for mechanisms that ensure compliance and protection of Indigenous rights. Human rights are universal, and it's time Australia was held to account for its ongoing colonial violence, systemic injustices. And I think there was 140 nations who signed the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And reluctantly, the four nations who resisted it was Australia, New Zealand, the US and Canada. And they only came to the party, I think, in 2007. Australia signed some kind of a formal agreement that they would look at it. And last year, or was it this year, Lydia Thorpe, the independent voice down there in Victoria, wanted to take the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and asked the government to use this as a mechanism after the referendum to, look at the rights of, use that as an instrument to guide their legislations and their policies. And she took that in the morning. By the evening, it was kicked out the door. So there's an issue for us. They signed it. How can they legislate and use it as a means of empowering it? I mean, Canada has gone a step in the right direction. I think it's Bolivia who's made the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a part of its constitution. And so if Australia could actually make some kind of a move to say this declaration is important for our country, for all people in our country, then they wouldn't be able to send Maoris back to New Zealand again. You know, it's madness, and it just drains your energy and your soul when you see such injustices being perpetrated on Indigenous peoples every day. It's just insane, and that insanity must stop.
I have another question from Diane Speed.
Oh,
How serious do you think the spirit of paternalism in the church is for a real change of approach?
is it? It's both paternalism, yeah, patriarchy, yes. You know, you can see little glimpses sometimes that gives you some form of hope. That sort of lifts your soul and saying, okay, maybe there might be a change, maybe not. I think after the referendum, I think I'm now trying to find those little glimpses again. Some kind of light. What's that? What's my favorite singer again? Leonard Cohen. What did he say? There's that in that song. What's the song? Anthem. He says, you know, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And so we need those little flickers of light to give us some hope.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking at here tonight with all of you people is those flickers of light that gives you hope that there are people out there who are advocating for true justice and for true hope and for true peace. I was in, where was I? In Geneva last year. I went there with our family from New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. Me, I was representing Australia. We went to the World Trade Organization. We were trying to get them to have a look at the ways in which the lands that they have all this trade happening, like from our country here, all of those products, whether it be gold or coal or whatever, that's ours.
Mm.
And they're selling it all over the world, and we don't get a benefit back from that. Not just only us, but also the Australian community doesn't get a proper benefit from all of that. So you can't allow that kind of ways in which the Australian community can only honour these one particular or two particular individuals without any kind of benefit coming back to the community. I mean, I'm not talking about communism. I'm just talking about basic Christianity, justice. And so how do you change that? And that's what we have to work on, how we change the ways in which our policies favour this kind of activity, and it only favours those kind of individuals who can make those profits and not share those with the rest of the community. So, goodness me, it's a big question, isn't it?
It is.
We've got some big issues, but like I say, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Thank you for showing me the light tonight.
And with those words, I think we have reached a wonderful conclusion to what has been an amazing discussion, Pastor Ray. I think that you've given us all not only food for thought, but some seeds for action to allow those seeds to grow into something more substantial that we can take forward into the next, let's call it the next phase.
Yes, we just need to reread, I think, Matthew 25. You can't get to Matthew 28 and going into all the world unless you go through Matthew 25, which talks about, I was in prison. You visited me. Oh, that was Luke, but also in Matthew 25, he talks about those kind of things there that make him glad in his heart. And if we started to do those things there and looked after the poor and the needy, those in prison, those who, we've got far too many in this country, far too many single mothers.
Mhm.
Goodness gracious me. And they talk about community and family violence. And I know what the result is from that. It means there's going to be more jails. And all of our Aboriginal men, anyways, are already in the jails, but that's just going to be full. And so we've got to deconstruct, bring these systems and policies back to earth and put them back into the heart of the family and the heart of the community again.
Again, as I say, wise words. Can I thank you, Pastor Ray? Can I thank everyone who's logged in tonight to be part of this NAIDOC Week special event? And it's wonderful the Edmund Rice Centre could host such a great speaker as yourself, Ray, to just give your insights, but also a sense of, the pathway forward. I think that's something which we're all yearning for at the moment.
I didn't finish that story about the WTO. There was one particular, the ambassador from Canada. She was blacker than I am. She was from the Caribbean.
Mm.
And I pulled her aside and I said, sis, what do you think is the most important issue facing all of humankind right now? She said, in a blink of an eye, she said, it's trust.
Mm.
We don't trust each other. Institutions don't trust each other. Countries don't trust each other. Churches don't trust each other. We don't trust. So I think one of the biggest issues that we face is how do we rebuild trust in each other? That to me was one of the greatest insight I've had since sliced bread.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Pastor Ray. We'll finish up now, but go well, go and be safe this weekend, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend to finish off NAIDOC Week. If you have an event that you want to go to, either on Saturday and Sunday, please make the time and effort to participate and learn a bit more about our culture. I call it our culture because it is our culture. We are part of this land and we are part of the community. And I think it's really important that we take the steps to actually understand what that means. So thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.